Decisive. Chapter 1. The Four Villains of Decision-Making 1. Steve Cole, the VP of Research and Development at Hope Lab, a nonprofit that fights to improve kids' health using technology, said, "Anytime in life you're tempted to think, should I do this or that, instead, ask yourself, is there a way I can do this and that? It's surprisingly frequent that it's feasible to do both things." For one major project, Cole and his team at Hope Lab wanted to find a design partner, a firm that could help them design a portable device capable of measuring the amount of exercise that kids were getting. There were at least 7 or 8 design firms in the Bay Area that were capable of doing the work. In a typical contracting situation, Hope Lab would have solicited a proposal from each firm and then given the winner a giant contract. But instead of choosing a winner, Cole ran a horse race. He shrank down the scope of the work so that it covered only the first step of the project, and then he hired 5 different firms to work on that first step independently. To be clear, he wasn't quintupling his budget as a nonprofit. Hope Lab didn't have unlimited resources. Cole knew that what he'd learned from that first round would make the later rounds more efficient. With his horse race, Cole ensured that he'd have multiple design alternatives for the device. He could either pick his favorite or combine the best features of several. Then, in round 2 of the design, he could weed out any vendors who were unresponsive or ineffective. Cole is fighting the first villain of decision-making, narrow framing, which is the tendency to define our choices too narrowly, to see them in binary terms. We ask, should I break up with my partner or not? Instead of what are the ways I could make this relationship better? We ask ourselves, should I buy a new car or not? Instead of what's the best way I could spend some money to make my family better off? In the introduction, when we asked the question should Shannon fire Clive or not, we were stuck in a narrow frame. We spotlighted one alternative at the expense of all the others. Cole, with his horse race, is breaking out of that trap. It wasn't an obvious move. He had to fight for the concept internally. At first, my colleagues thought I was insane. At the beginning, it costs some money and takes some time. But now everybody here does it. You get to meet lots of people. You get to know lots of different kinds of things about the industry. You get convergence on some issues, so you know they are right, and you also learn to appreciate what makes the firms different and special. None of this can you do if you're just talking to one person. And when all of those 5 firms know that there are 4 other shops involved, they bring their best game. Notice the contrast with the pros and cons approach. Cole could have tallied up the advantages and disadvantages of working with each vendor, and then used that analysis to make a decision. But that would have reflected narrow framing. Implicitly, he would have been assuming that there was one vendor that was uniquely capable of crafting the perfect solution, and that he could identify that vendor on the basis of a proposal. 2. There's a more subtle factor involved too. Cole, in meeting with the teams, would have inevitably developed a favorite, a team he clicked with. And though intellectually he might have realized that the people he likes personally aren't necessarily the ones who are going to build the best products, he would have been tempted to jigger the pros and cons list in their favor. Cole might not even have been aware he was doing it, but because pros and cons are generated in our heads, it is very, very easy for us to bias the factors. We think we are conducting a sober comparison, but, in reality, our brains are following orders from our guts. Our normal habit in life is to develop a quick belief about a situation, and then seek out information that bolsters our belief. And that problematic habit, called the confirmation bias, is the second villain of decision-making. Here's a typical result from one of the many studies on the topic. Smokers in the 1960s, back when the medical research on the harms of smoking was less clear, were more likely to express interest in reading an article headlined "Smoking does not lead to lung cancer" than one with the headline "Smoking leads to lung cancer." To see how this could lead to bad decisions, imagine your boss staring at 2 research studies headline data that supports what you think and data that contradicts what you think. Guess which one gets cited at the staff meeting? Researchers have found this result again and again. When people have the opportunity to collect information from the world, they are more likely to select information that supports their pre-existing attitudes, beliefs, and actions. Political partisans seek out media outlets that support their side, but will rarely challenge their beliefs by seeking out the other side's perspective. Consumers who covet new cars or computers will look for reasons to justify the purchase but won't be as diligent about finding reasons to postpone it. The tricky thing about the confirmation bias is that it can look very scientific. After all, we are collecting data. Dan Lovallo, the professor and decision-making researcher cited in the introduction, said, confirmation bias is probably the single biggest problem in business, because even the most sophisticated people get it wrong. People go out and they're collecting the data, and they don't realize they're cooking the books. At work and in life, we often pretend that we want truth, when we are really seeking reassurance. Do these jeans make me look fat? What did you think of my poem? These questions do not crave honest answers. Or pity the poor contestants, who try out to sing on reality TV shows, despite having no discernible ability to carry a tune. When they get harsh feedback from the judges, they look shocked. Crushed. And you realize, this is the first time in their lives they've received honest feedback. Eager for reassurance, they'd lock their spotlights on the praise and support they received from friends and family. Given that affirmation, it's not hard to see why they'd think they had a chance to become the next American Idol. It was a reasonable conclusion drawn from a wildly distorted pool of data. And this is what's slightly terrifying about the confirmation bias. When we want something to be true, we will spotlight the things that support it, and then, when we draw conclusions from those spotlighted scenes, we'll congratulate ourselves on a reasoned decision. Whoops. 3. In his memoir, Only the Paranoid Survive, Andy Grove recalled a tough dilemma he faced in 1985, as the president of Intel, whether to kill the company's line of memory chips. Intel's business had been built on memory. For a time, in fact, the company was the world's only source of memory, but by the end of the 1970s, a dozen or so competitors had emerged. Meanwhile, a small team at Intel had developed another product, the microprocessor, and in 1981 the team got a big break when IBM chose Intel's microprocessor to be the brain of its new personal computer. Intel's team scrambled to build the manufacturing capacity it would need to produce the chips. At that point, Intel became a company with two products, memory and microprocessors. Memory was still the dominant source of the company's revenue, but in the early 1980s, the company's competitive position in the memory business came under threat from Japanese companies. People who came back from visits to Japan told scary stories, said Grove. It was reported that one Japanese company was designing multiple generations of memory all at once. The 16K people were on one floor, the 64K people were a floor above, and the 256K team was above them. Intel's customers began to rave about the quality of the Japanese memories. In fact, the quality levels attributed to Japanese memories were beyond what we thought possible, said Grove. Our first reaction was denial. This had to be wrong. As people often do in this kind of situation, we vigorously attacked the data. Only when we confirmed for ourselves that the claims were roughly right did we start to go to work on the quality of our product. We were clearly behind. Between 1978 and 1988, the market share held by Japanese companies doubled from 30% to 60%. A debate raged inside Intel about how to respond to the Japanese competition. One camp of leaders wanted to leapfrog the Japanese in manufacturing. They proposed building a giant new factory to make memory chips. Another camp wanted to bet on an avant-garde technology that they thought the Japanese couldn't match. A third camp wanted to double down on the company's strategy of serving specialty markets. As the debate continued with no resolution, the company began losing more and more money. The microprocessor business was growing rapidly, but Intel's failures in memory were becoming a drag on profits. Grove summarized the year 1984 by saying, "It was a grim and frustrating year. During the time, we worked hard without a clear notion of how things were ever going to get better. We had lost our bearings." In the middle of 1985, after more months of fruitless debate, Grove was discussing the memory quandary in his office with Intel's chairman and CEO, Gordon Moore. They were both fatigued by the internal deliberations. Then Grove had an inspiration. "I looked out the window at the Ferris wheel of the Great America amusement park revolving in the distance. Then I turned back to Gordon and I asked, if we got kicked out and the board brought in a new CEO, what do you think he would do?" Gordon answered without hesitation, "He would get us out of memories." I stared at him, numb, then said, "Why shouldn't you and I walk out the door, come back in, and do it ourselves?" This was the moment of clarity. From the perspective of an outsider, someone not encumbered by the historical legacy and the political infighting, shutting down the memory business was the obvious thing to do. The switch in perspectives what would our successors do? Helped Moore and Grove see the big picture clearly. Of course, abandoning memory was not easy. Many of Grove's colleagues were furiously opposed to the idea. Some held that memory was the seedbed of Intel's technology expertise and that without it, other areas of research were likely to wither. Others insisted that Intel's sales force could not get customers' attention without selling a full range of products, memories as well as microprocessors. After much gnashing of teeth, Grove insisted that the sales force tell their customers that Intel would no longer be carrying memory products. The customer's reaction was, essentially, a big yawn. One said, "It sure took you a long time." Since that decision in 1985, Intel has dominated the microprocessor market. If, on the day of Grove's insight, you had invested $1,000 in Intel, by 2012 your investment would have been worth $47,000 compared with $7,600 for the S&P 500, a composite of other big companies. It seems safe to say that he made the right decision. Grove's story reveals a flaw in the way many experts think about decisions. If you review the research literature on decisions, you'll find that many decision-making models are basically glorified spreadsheets. If you are shopping for an apartment, for instance, you might be advised to list the 8 apartments you found, rank them on a number of key factors: cost, location, size, etc. Assign a weighting that reflects the importance of each factor. Cost is more important than size, for instance, and then do the math to find the answer. Move back in with mom and dad. There's one critical ingredient missing from this kind of analysis: emotion. Grove's decision wasn't difficult because he lacked options or information, it was difficult because he felt conflicted. The short-term pressures and political wrangling clouded his mind and obscured the long-term need to exit the memory business. This brings us to the third villain of decision-making, short-term emotion. When we've got a difficult decision to make, our feelings churn. We replay the same arguments in our head. We agonize about our circumstances. We change our minds from day to day. If our decision was represented on a spreadsheet, none of the numbers would be changing. There's no new information being added, but it doesn't feel that way in our heads. We have picked up so much dust that we can't see the way forward. In those moments, what we need most is perspective. Ben Franklin was aware of the effects of temporary emotion. His moral algebra wisely suggests that people add to their pros and cons list over several days, giving them a chance to add factors as they grow more or less excited about a particular idea. Still, though, to compare options rigorously is not the same as seeing the bigger picture. No doubt Andy Grove had been compiling his pros and cons list about whether to exit the memory business for many years. But the analysis left him paralyzed, and it took a quick dose of detachment seeing things from the perspective of his successor to break the paralysis. 4. The odds of a meltdown are 1 in 10,000 years. Vitaly Sklyarov, Minister of Power and Electrification in the Ukraine, 2 months before the Chernobyl accident. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? Harry Warner, Warner Bros. Studios, 1927. What use could this company make of an electrical toy? William Orton, President of the Western Union Telegraph Company, in 1876, rejecting an opportunity to purchase Alexander Graham Bell's patent on the telephone. Our search for the final villain of decision-making takes us back to January 1, 1962, when a young four-man rock and roll group named the Beatles was invited to audition in London for one of the 2 major British record labels, Decca Records. We were all excited, recalled John Lennon. It was Decca. During an hour-long audition, they played 15 different songs, mostly covers. The Beatles and their manager, Brian Epstein, were hopeful they'd get a contract, and they waited anxiously for a response. Eventually they received the verdict. Decca had decided to pass. In a letter to Epstein, Dick Rowe, a prominent talent scout at Decca Records, wrote, "We don't like your boys' sound. Groups are out. 4-piece groups with guitars, particularly, are finished." As Dick Rowe would soon learn, the fourth villain of decision-making is overconfidence. People think they know more than they do about how the future will unfold. Recall that Andy Grove's colleagues had dire predictions of what would happen if Intel stopped making memory chips. We will lose the seedbed of our R&D. Our sales force can't succeed without a full line of products. History proves that they were wrong. Intel's R&D and sales stayed strong. But what's interesting is that, at the time they made these proclamations, they didn't feel uncertain. They weren't hedging their remarks by saying, "It's possible that," or "I just worry that this could happen someday." They knew they were right. They just knew it. A study showed that when doctors reckoned themselves completely certain about a diagnosis, they were wrong 40% of the time. When a group of students made estimates that they believed had only a 1% chance of being wrong, they were actually wrong 27% of the time. We have too much confidence in our own predictions. When we make guesses about the future, we shine our spotlights on information that's close at hand, and then we draw conclusions from that information. Imagine the head of a travel agency in 1992. "My travel agency is the market leader in Phoenix, and we have the best customer relationships. This area is growing so rapidly, we could easily double in size over the next 10 years. Let's get ahead of the curve and build those additional branches. The problem is that we don't know what we don't know. Whoops, the internet. So much for my travel agency. The future has an uncanny ability to surprise. We can't shine a spotlight on areas when we don't know they exist. Let's sum up where we are. If you think about a normal decision process, it usually proceeds in 4 steps. You encounter a choice. You analyze your options. You make a choice. Then you live with it. And what we've seen is that there is a villain that afflicts each of these stages. You encounter a choice. But narrow framing makes you miss options. You analyze your options. But the confirmation bias leads you to gather self-serving information. You make a choice. But short-term emotion will often tempt you to make the wrong one. Then you live with it. But you'll often be overconfident about how the future will unfold. So, at this point, we know what we're up against. We know the 4 top villains of decision-making. We also know that the classic pros and cons approach is not well suited to fighting these villains. In fact, it doesn't meaningfully counteract any of them. Now we can turn our attention to a more optimistic question. What's the process that will help us overcome these villains and make better choices? 5. In the fall of 1772, a man named Joseph Priestley was struggling with a career decision, and the way he handled the decision points us toward a solution. Priestley, a brilliant man with an astonishing variety of talents, did not lack for career options. He was employed as a minister for a dissenting church in Leeds, England. Dissenting meant that it was not affiliated with the Church of England, the state-sanctioned. But he was a man with many hobbies, all of which seemed to take on historical significance. As an advocate for religious tolerance, he helped to found the Unitarian Church in England. As a philosopher, he wrote works on metaphysics that were cited as important influences by John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. An accomplished scientist, Priestley is credited with the discovery of 10 gases, including ammonia and carbon monoxide. He is best known for discovering the most important gas of them all, oxygen. A political rabble-rouser, Priestley spoke out in favor of the French Revolution, which roused the suspicion of the government and his fellow citizens. Later, as tempers flared, a mob burned down his home and church, forcing him to flee, first to London and eventually to the United States, where he spent the rest of his life. Priestley was a theologian, a chemist, an educator, a political theorist, a husband, and a father. He published more than 150 works, ranging from a history of electricity to a seminal work on English grammar. He even invented soda water, so every time you enjoy your Diet Coke, you can thank Priestley. In short, Priestley's career was a bit like an 18th-century version of Forrest Gump, if Gump were a genius. He intersected with countless movements of historical and scientific significance. But in the fall of 1772, he had a much more prosaic problem on his hands: money. Priestley, like any father, worried about the financial security of his growing family. His salary as a minister, £100 a year, was not sufficient to build substantial savings for his children, who eventually numbered 8. So he started looking for other options, and some colleagues connected him with the Earl of Shelburne, a science buff and a supporter of dissenting religious groups in England's House of Lords. Shelburne was recently widowed and looking for intellectual companionship and help in training his children. Lord Shelburne offered Priestley a job as a tutor and an advisor. For a salary of £250 a year, Priestley would supervise the education of Lord Shelburne's children and counsel him on political and governmental matters. Priestley was impressed by the offer, particularly the money, of course, but was also cautious about what he had be signing on for. Seeking advice, he wrote to several colleagues he respected, including a wise and resourceful man he'd met while writing The History of Electricity, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin replied with the moral algebra letter cited in our introduction, suggesting that Priestley use the process of pros and cons to guide his decision. Thanks to the record provided by Priestley's letters to friends, it's possible to imagine how Priestley would have used the moral algebra process. The pros: good money, better security for his family. The cons were more plentiful. The job might require a move to London, which bothered Priestley, who described himself as so happy at home, that he hated to contemplate being apart from his family. He worried, too, about the relationship with Shelburne. Would it feel like master and servant? And even if it started off fine, what would happen if Shelburne grew tired of him? Finally, Priestley worried that the commitments would distract him from more important work. Would he end up spending his days teaching multiplication to kids instead of blazing new intellectual paths in religion and science? From the perspective of the pros and cons list, accepting the offer looks like a pretty bad decision. There's basically one big pro money stacked up against an array of serious cons. Fortunately, though, Priestley largely ignored Franklin's advice and found ways to circumvent the four villains of decision-making. First, he rejected the narrow frame, should I take this offer or not? Instead, he started pushing for new and better options. He considered alternative ways to bring in more income, such as speaking tours to lecture on a scientific work. In the spirit of a not-or he negotiated for a better deal with Shelburne, at a time when people rarely questioned the nobility. Priestley ensured that a tutor, rather than he, would handle the education of Shelburne's kids, and he arranged to spend most of his time in the country with his family, making trips to London only when Shelburne really needed him. Second, he dodged the confirmation bias. Early in the process, Priestley received a strong letter from a friend who argued vehemently against Shelburne's offer, insisting that it would humiliate Priestley and leave him dependent on a nobleman's charity. Priestley took the objection quite seriously, and at one point he reported that he was leaning against the offer. But rather than stewing over his internal pros and cons list, he went out and collected more data. Specifically, he sought the advice of people who knew Shelburne, and the consensus was clear. Those who are acquainted with Lord Shelburne encouraged me to accept his proposal, but most of those who know the world in general, but not Lord Shelburne in particular, dissuade me from it. In other words, the people who knew the Lord best were the most positive about the offer. Based on these converging assessments, Priestley began to consider the offer more seriously. Third, Priestley got some distance from his short-term emotions. He sought advice from friends as well as more neutral colleagues such as Franklin. He didn't allow himself to be distracted by visceral feelings, the quick flush of being offered a 150% raise or the social shame of being thought dependent by a friend. He made his decision based on the two factors he cared most about in the long term, his family's welfare and his scholarly independence. Finally, he avoided overconfidence. He expected the relationship to fare well, but he knew that he might be wrong. He worried, in particular, about leaving his family exposed financially, if Shelburne had a sudden change of heart about the arrangement. So he negotiated a sort of insurance policy. Shelburne agreed to pay him £150 a year for life, even if their relationship was terminated. In the end, Priestley accepted the offer, and he worked for Lord Shelburne for about 7 years. It would be one of the most prolific periods of his career, the period of his most important philosophical work and his discovery of oxygen. Shelburne and Priestley eventually parted ways. The reasons aren't clear, but Priestley said they separated amicably, and Shelburne honored his agreement to provide £150 a year to the newly independent Priestley. 6. We believe Priestley made a good decision to work with Shelburne, though it's impossible to say for certain. After all, it's possible that spending time with Shelburne distracted him just enough to stop him from making yet another world historical contribution. Cinnamon rolls? The electric slide? But what we do know is that there's a lot to admire about the process he used to make the decision, because he demonstrates that it's possible to overcome the four villains of decision-making. Of course, he's not the only one to triumph. Steve Cole at Hope Lab beat narrow framing by thinking and not were. Andy Grove overcame short-term emotions by asking, what would my successor do? We can't deactivate our biases, but these people show us that we can counteract them with the right discipline. The nature of each villain suggests a strategy for defeating it. 1. You encounter a choice. But narrow framing makes you miss options. So, widen your options. How can you expand your set of choices? We'll study the habits of people who are expert at uncovering new options, including a college selection advisor, some executives whose businesses survived and even thrived during global recessions, and a boutique firm that has named some of the world's top brands, including BlackBerry and Pentium. 2. You analyze your options. But the confirmation bias leads you to gather self-serving info. So, reality test your assumptions. How can you get outside your head and collect information that you can trust? We'll learn how to ask craftier questions, how to turn a contentious meeting into a productive one in 30 seconds, and what kind of expert advice should make you suspicious. 3. You make a choice. But short-term emotion will often tempt you to make the wrong one. So, attain distance before deciding. How can you overcome short-term emotion and conflicted feelings to make the best choice? We'll discover how to triumph over manipulative car salesmen, why losing $50 is more painful than gaining $50 is pleasurable, and what simple question often makes agonizing decisions perfectly easy. 4. Then you live with it. But you'll often be overconfident about how the future will unfold. So, prepare to be wrong. How can we plan for an uncertain future, so that we give our decisions the best chance to succeed? We'll show you how one woman scored a raise by mentally simulating the negotiation in advance, how you can bring in your spouse's crazy business idea, and why it can be smart to warn new employees about how lousy their jobs will be. Our goal in this book is to teach this 4-step process for making better choices. Note the mnemonic wrap, which captures the 4 verbs. We like the notion of a process that wraps around your usual way of making decisions, helping to protect you from some of the biases we've identified. The 4 steps in the wrap model are sequential. In general, you can follow them in order but not rigidly so. Sometimes you'll double back based on something you've learned. For example, in the course of gathering information to reality test your assumptions, you might discover a new option you hadn't considered before. Other times, you won't need all of the steps. A long-awaited promotion probably won't require much distance before you accept and pop the champagne. At its core, the wrap model urges you to switch from auto spotlight to manual spotlight. Rather than make choices based on what naturally comes to your attention, visceral emotions, self-serving information, overconfident predictions, and so on, you deliberately illuminate more strategic spots. You sweep your light over a broader landscape and point it into hidden corners. Now you've reached the part of the book where we are supposed to assure you that, if you follow these 4 steps religiously, your life will be a picture of human contentment. You will lack for nothing, and your peers will herald your wisdom. Alas, if our own experience is any guide, then you are still going to make a healthy share of bad decisions. Here is our goal. We want to make you a bit better at making good decisions, and we want to help you make your good decisions a bit more decisively with appropriate confidence, as opposed to overconfidence. We also want to make you a better advisor to your colleagues and loved ones who are making decisions, because it's usually easier to see other people's biases than your own. This book will address decisions that take longer than 5 minutes to make, whether to buy a new car, take a new job, or break up with your boyfriend. How to handle a difficult colleague. How to allocate budgetary resources between departments. Whether to start your own business. If a decision takes only seconds, if, for instance, you're an NFL quarterback choosing which open receiver to hit with a pass, then this book will not help you. Much has been written in recent years about intuitive decisions, which can be surprisingly quick and accurate. But in this is a critical but intuition is only accurate in domains where it has been carefully trained. To train intuition requires a predictable environment where you get lots of repetition and quick feedback on your choices. For a longer discussion of this issue, see the endnotes section. If you're a chess grandmaster, you should trust your gut. You've had thousands of hours of study and practice with prompt feedback on your moves. If you're a manager making a hiring decision, you shouldn't. You've probably hired only a small number of people over the years, and the feedback from those hires is delayed and often confounded by other factors. Our hope is that you'll embrace the process we outline in Decisive, and practice it until it becomes second nature. As an analogy, think of the humble grocery list. If you're forgetful as we are, it's hard to imagine shopping without a list. Over time, the routine sharpens, you get better at recording, right away, the random items that occur to you, and when you shop, you begin to trust that everything you need to buy will be on the list. The grocery list is a correction for the deficiency of forgetfulness. And it's a much better solution than focusing really hard on not being forgetful. Because we wanted the wrap process to be useful and memorable, we have done our best to keep it simple. That was a challenge, because the decision-making literature is voluminous and complex. As a result, we've had to omit some very interesting work, to let the most useful research shine through. If you're hungry for more, see the end of the book for reading recommendations. Occasionally some aspect of the wrap process will lead to a home run insight, as in the cases of Steve Cole's horse race and Andy Grove's question, what would our successors do? More commonly, it will yield small, but consistent improvements in the way you make decisions, and that's critical too. Think of a baseball player's batting average. If a player gets a hit in 1 out of every 4 at-bats, 8.25 average over the course of a season, he is mediocre. If he hits in 1 out of 3.333, he's an all-star. And if he hits .333 over his career, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Yet the gap in performance is small, only 1 extra hit in every 12 at-bats. To get that kind of consistent improvement requires technique and practice. It requires a process. The value of the wrap process is that it reliably focuses our attention on things we otherwise might have missed, options we might have overlooked, information we might have resisted, and preparations we might have neglected. A more subtle way the wrap process can help us is by ensuring that we're aware of the need to make a decision. And that leads us to David Lee Roth. Roth was the lead singer for Van Halen from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, an era when the band cranked out one smash hit after another, Running with the Devil, Dance the Night Away, Jump, Hot for Teacher, and more. Van Halen toured tirelessly, with over 100 concerts in 1984 alone, and behind the band's head-banging appeal was some serious operational expertise. It was one of the first rock bands to bring major stage productions to smaller markets. As Roth recalled in his autobiography, we'd pull up with 9 18-wheeler trucks, full of gear, where the standard was 3 trucks, max. The band's production design was astonishingly complex. The contract specifying the setup was, according to Roth, like a version of the Chinese Yellow Pages, because it was so technical and complex it was like reading a foreign language. A typical article in the contract might say, there will be 15 amperage voltage sockets at 20-foot spaces, evenly, providing 19 amperes. While Van Halen had its own road crew, much of the prep work had to be done in advance, before the 18-wheelers arrived. Van Halen and its crew lived in fear that the venue's stagehands would screw up something and leave the band exposed to injury. This was the same era when Michael Jackson's head was set on fire by some misfiring stage pyrotechnics as he filmed a Pepsi commercial. But, given the band's frantic touring schedule, there wasn't time to do a top-to-bottom quality check at each venue. How could the band know when they were at risk? During the same period of touring, rumors circulated wildly about Van Halen's backstage antics. The band members were notorious partiers, and while there's nothing particularly noteworthy about a rock band that likes to party, Van Halen seemed committed to a level of decadence that was almost artistic. Roth wrote in his autobiography, "Well, we've heard about throwing a television out a window. How about getting enough extension cords so that the television can remain plugged in all the way down to the ground floor?" Sometimes, though, the band's actions seemed less like playful mayhem and more like egomania. The most egregious rumor about the band was that its contract writer demanded a bowl of M&Ms backstage with all the brown ones removed. There were tales of Roth walking backstage, spotting a single brown M&M, and freaking out, trashing the dressing room. This rumor was true. The brown-free bowl of M&Ms became the perfect, appalling symbol of rock star diva behavior. Here was a band making absurd demands simply because it could. Get ready to reverse your perception. The band's M&M clause was written into its contract to serve a very specific purpose. It was called Article 126, and it read as follows: "There will be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area, upon pain of forfeiture of the show, with full compensation." The article was buried in the middle of countless technical specifications. When Roth would arrive at a new venue, he'd immediately walk backstage and glance at the M&M bowl. If he saw a brown M&M, he'd demand a line check of the entire production. "Guaranteed you're going to arrive at a technical error," he said. They didn't read the contract. Sometimes it would threaten to just destroy the whole show. In other words, David Lee Roth was no diva, he was an operations master. He needed a way to assess quickly whether the stagehands at each venue were paying attention, whether they'd read every word of the contract and taken it seriously. He needed a way, in other words, to snap out of mental autopilot and realize that a decision had to be made. In Van Halen's world, a brown M&M was a tripwire. Couldn't we all use a few tripwires in our lives? We'd have a trigger weight that signaled the need to exercise more, or a trigger date on the calendar that reminded us to ask whether we're investing enough in our relationships. Sometimes the hardest part of making a good decision is knowing there's one to be made. In life, we spend most of our days on autopilot, going through our usual routines. We may make only a handful of conscious, considered choices every day. But while these decisions don't occupy much of our time, they have a disproportionate influence on our lives. The psychologist Roy Baumeister draws an analogy to driving in our cars. We may spend 95% of our time going straight, but it's the turns that determine where we end up. This is a book about those turns. In the chapters to come, we'll show you how a 4-part process can boost your chances of getting where you want to go. Chapter 2. To avoid a narrow frame 1. In July 2012, a user named Clayable posted a dilemma on the Q&A community of the website Ask.com, Clayable, break up or not? I don't know what to do. Every time I go to my boyfriend's house, or hang out with his family, I feel like I'm constantly being judged. His sister, who is the same age as me, is very mood-swingy towards me. His older brother hates me and calls me a BTCH. His mom is rude to me and makes insulting jokes at me. What do I do? I like him, but I'm tired of being judged and feeling weird when I'm with them. Within a day, she had almost a dozen responses, including these. Shally 333, as long as he is not treating you this way, then I wouldn't break up with him. Just try not hanging out with his family as much. I'm a 74,523. Don't talk nonsense. If he loves her, he should stand up for her. If my family would do this to my GF, I would tell them to bleep themselves up. You should tell him that you're going to leave him because of his family and then see how he reacts. Then you'll see if he loves you. Yala 1212. Do whatever feels right. 14. Sweetie, breaking up isn't the answer if he treats you good. Make other plans to hang out other places, and explain to him why. If he can't handle this and work with how you feel, then he doesn't deserve you. Labial eyes, this is the truth. Leave him if he doesn't say anything to his family about it, because if he doesn't, then he don't care. Kuckelberg, run fast. This family is creepy. The breakup dilemma is a classic of the teenage decision-making genre, along with others like what to wear, whom to hang out with, what car to buy, and how long to wait before wrecking it. Note that Clayable above has framed her decision narrowly when she asks, should I break up or not? Some of the commenters accept this narrow frame - run fast, whereas others try to widen the set of options she is considering, as with the advice to make other plans, to hang out other places and explain to him why. A researcher named Baruch Fishkoff, a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, wanted to understand more about the teenage decision-making process, so he and his colleagues interviewed 105 teenage girls in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Eugene, Oregon. They asked the girls to describe in detail recent decisions in 7 different domains: school, parents, clothes, peers, health, money, and free time. In the interviews, the teens reported some peculiar decisions. Most of us think of a decision as a situation where we must choose among 2 or more options. Should we eat at Chipotle or Subway? Which color shirt should we buy, the navy, the black, or the white one? But teenagers' decisions rarely had this structure. When Fishkoff began to categorize up teens' decisions, he found that the most common type was one that lacked any choice at all. It was what he called a statement of resolve. An example would be, I'm going to stop blaming others. In the second most common type of decision, teens assessed a single option, such as I'm deciding whether or not I should smoke cigarettes with my friend, or, as in the case of Clayable, I'm deciding whether or not to break up with my boyfriend. We'll refer to decisions like these as whether or not decisions. This isn't a decision among multiple alternatives. As with picking between Chipotle and Subway, it's simply an up or down vote on a single alternative. These 2 categories, statements of resolve and whether or not decisions, composed about 65% of teenagers' decisions. In other words, if a teenager is making a decision, chances are there's no real choice being made at all. As an aside, when we first came across Fishtoff's study, we were shocked by the lack of consideration teens gave to their options. But when we shared the results of the study with our sister, who has raised 2 teenagers, she was unimpressed. "What do you expect?" she said. "Kids get to their teen years, the hormones kick in, and they spend a few years operating without a frontal lobe. Teenagers are blind to their choices. They get stuck thinking about questions like should I go to the party or not? The party is in their mental spotlight, assessed in isolation, while other options go unexplored. A more enlightened teen might let the spotlight roam. Should I go to the party all night, or go to the movies with a few friends, or attend the basketball game and then drop by the party for a few minutes?" In short, teens are prone to narrow framing, the first of our villains of decision-making. They see only a small sliver of the spectrum of options available to them. And, as it turns out, when it comes to making decisions, organizations are a lot like teenagers, too. In 1983, William Smithburg, the CEO of Quaker, made a bold decision to acquire the parent company of Gatorade for $220 million. According to a summary of reports from the time, Smithburg made the Gatorade purchase impulsively, basing the acquisition on his taste buds. He tried the product and liked it. And his taste buds proved savvy. Thanks to Quaker's aggressive marketing, Gatorade grew ferociously. The $220 million purchase grew in estimated value to $3 billion. About a decade later, in 1994, Smithburg proposed buying another beverage brand, Snapple, for a stunning $1.8 billion. It was a price that some analysts squawked might be $1 billion too high, but, because of Gatorade's massive success, the Quaker board of directors didn't protest. To Smithburg, the Snapple acquisition must have seemed like a replay of Gatorade. Here was another chance to make a bold bet. As researcher Paul Nutt wrote, Smithburg had received accolades for the Gatorade deal, and wanted another flashy acquisition. Snapple was another niche brand with the potential to cross over to the mass market. The high cost of the acquisition, Smithburg knew, would leave Quaker deep in debt, but to him this was actually a bonus. He was worried about a hostile takeover of Quaker, and he believed the debt would deter potential raiders. So with the board's support, Smithburg moved quickly, and the deal was completed in 1994. It was a fiasco. The Snapple acquisition has become known as one of the worst decisions in business history. Quaker discovered that Snapple was almost nothing like Gatorade. The brand's teas and juices demanded very different approaches to manufacturing and distribution. And Quaker managed to make a mess of Snapple's brand image, abandoning the quirky, authentic voice that had helped Snapple succeed. These trouble spots could have been surfaced before the acquisition, if Quaker's execs had bothered to investigate. When Snapple's sales didn't take off the way Gatorade's had, Quaker executives had an emergency on their hands. The debt burden threatened to bring down the company. 3 years later, Snapple was hurriedly sold off to Triarch Corporation for $300 million, one-sixth the original price. Humiliated, Smithburg stepped down as CEO. He later reflected, there was so much excitement about bringing in a new brand, a brand with legs. We should have had a couple of people arguing the no side of the evaluation. That's a pretty staggering confession. Under Smithburg's leadership, Quaker was contemplating the largest acquisition in its history, with deal terms that had been mocked widely by industry analysts, and yet, unbelievably, there was no one within Quaker arguing against the acquisition. Quaker wasn't even making a whether or not choice, it was making a yes or yes choice. Quaker's decision was pretty egregious, but the company is hardly alone in making an ill-advised acquisition. A KPMG study of 700 mergers and acquisitions mentioned previously in the introduction found that 83% of them did not boost shareholder value. This suggests a good rule of thumb for business leaders: if you've spent weeks or months analyzing a potential target, and what you've learned has convinced you to make an offer, don't. 5 times out of 6 you'll be right. Of course, we shouldn't expect acquisitions, with their attendant forces of ego and emotion and competition, to be typical of organizational decision-making. The average manager, making a normal decision outside the world of deal-making, should easily dodge the teenage trap. Right? For the answer we turn to Paul Nutt, who may know more than anyone alive about how managers make decisions. In 2010, Nutt retired from the business school faculty of Ohio State University, having spent his 30-year career collecting decisions the way some people collect stamps. He analyzed decisions made by businesses, McDonald's considering a new design for its stores, and nonprofits, a 250-bed rural hospital deciding whether to add a detox unit, and government agencies, Florida's Medicaid program contemplating how to revamp its fraud management system. In each situation, Nutt gathered data in a prescribed way. First he interviewed the primary decision-maker, often a CEO or COO. Then he cross-checked their reports with 2 other informants, usually senior managers, who had watched the decision process unfold. Finally he evaluated whether the decisions had succeeded. Not trusting the judgment of the primary decision-makers, who'd be biased in their own favor, he asked the informants to assess the quality of the decision. Did the decision produce an option that was successfully adopted? Was the success sustained over time? A 1993 study by Nutt, which analyzed 168 decisions in this laborious way, came to a stunning conclusion: of the teams he studied, only 29% considered more than one alternative. By way of comparison, 30% of the teams in the Fishtoff study considered more than one alternative. According to Paul Nutt's research, then, most organizations seem to be using the same decision process as a hormone-crazed teenager. Organizations, like teenagers, are blind to their choices. And the consequences are serious. Nutt found that, whether or not decisions failed 52% of the time over the long term, versus only 32% of the decisions with 2 or more alternatives. Why do whether or not decisions fail more often? Not argues that when a manager pursues a single option, she spends most of her time asking, how can I make this work? How can I get my colleagues behind me? Meanwhile, other vital questions get neglected. Is there a better way? What else could we do? Finding answers to those questions - is there a better way? What else could we do? Is the goal of this part of the RAP framework. Widen your options. Can we learn to escape a narrow frame and discover better options for ourselves? The first step toward that goal is to learn to distrust whether or not decisions. In fact, we hope when you see or hear that phrase, a little alarm bell will go off in your head, reminding you to consider whether you're stuck in a narrow frame. If you're willing to invest some effort in a broader search, you'll usually find that your options are more plentiful than you initially think. 3. Heidi Price was so frustrated by one of her family's decisions that she ended up founding a business to help other families avoid the same frustration. In 2003, she was trying to help her daughter, a high school senior, pick the right college. It was a struggle finding information they could trust. All the college brochures looked alike down to the obligatory photo of a polyracial group of students reading under a tree. Surely those photos should be modernized to show a polyracial group of students using their smartphones to crib from Wikipedia? After months of consideration, her daughter eventually decided to enroll in an honors program at the University of Kansas, but the difficulty of the search nagged at Price. They'd been inundated with the information, but it had been tough to tease out what was important. Curious, Price started to dig into the research on undergraduate education, what factors really made a difference for students. She started sharing her discoveries with friends, and soon they were asking for her advice. Which college do you think is right for my kid? Convinced there was a need for a better college selection process, Price and a partner co-founded College Match, a small firm in Kansas City that helps match students with the college that's right for them. One of Price's early clients was actually her nephew, Cofield Schnug, who had grown up in Texas, though he was far from the stereotypical Texas teenager. He didn't play sports. He wasn't a football fan. He was liberal, bright, and quirky while in high school. He got interested in guitars, played in a band, won a writing contest, and helped his dad with a screenplay. Often bored by school, his grades were mediocre. He was unlikely to be admitted to the best-ranked state schools, the University of Texas and Texas A&M. When his dad took him to see his other options in the state, he had to be cajoled to get out of the car. At one university, his visit coincided with a fraternity party, where drunk students were spraying one another with hoses. One part of me thought it was fun and another part thought it was barbaric, said Schnug. The Animal House vision of college held no allure for him. I wanted to find out what was wrong with me if I was good at anything. I felt like I was smart. I felt like I had interests, but what were they? I didn't want to drink a six-pack. It wasn't my mission. Price had several suggestions for Schnug, but one stood out in her mind: Hendrix College, a small liberal arts school in Conway, Arkansas, known for its artsy, liberal culture. Schnug had never heard of Hendrix, but he agreed to visit. The change in atmosphere appealed to him. He would leave the big, hip city of Austin and move to an uncool, rural Arkansas town. I can be monkish here, he remembers thinking. I felt like I could focus on my studies. Schnug blossomed at Hendrix. It was the right environment for him. My first year at Hendrix, I read 3 or 4 books every week. I watched 1 or 2 or 3 foreign films every single day. I took philosophy courses. I turned into an academic person, he said. Schnug thrived academically, double majoring in film studies and English, and he studied abroad for 2 semesters, including a fall term at Oxford University. While traveling in Barcelona, he made a documentary about Goethe's architecture. It was a far cry from old Milwaukee kegs and fraternity hose downs. Eventually he decided that he wanted to get a PhD in film studies. Getting a PhD was an aspiration his family would never have anticipated before Hendrix. After gaining acceptance to several programs, he chose Harvard. He was one of only 3 students admitted to the school's Film and Visual Studies program in 2012. Heidi Price helps students and parents to take off their blinders, to see that their universe of schools is not the 20 schools that sit atop the rankings but rather the 2,719 schools that offer 4-year degrees in the United States, most of which admit the majority of their applicants. The top-ranked schools are unquestionably fine institutions, but the rankings may signify less than meets the eye. Parents are often surprised to learn that the vaunted United States News and World Report rankings rely on statistics such as faculty compensation and the percentage of alumni who make donations, which have little to do with the experience of students. Nothing in the rankings directly measures whether students are enjoying their college experience, or whether they are learning anything. Parents are often shocked, too, to hear that, once you control for aptitude, a person's lifetime earnings don't vary based on what college they attended. In other words, if you're smart enough to get into Yale, it doesn't really matter from an income perspective, whether you go there, or instead choose your much cheaper state university. The question a college-bound senior should be asking, according to Price, is not what's the highest-ranking college I can convince to take me. Rather, it should be what do I want out of life, and what are the best options to get me there. Those 2 questions are in no way synonymous, and once families start thinking about the latter one, they often find that they have many more good options than they ever thought possible. Spiritual advisors are often called on to do a similar kind of reframing. Father J. Brian Bransfield, Associate General Secretary of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, said that the parishioners who seek out his advice have a tendency, as do Price's clients, to unduly narrow their options. Individuals will often approach him with a dilemma: should I marry this person? Should I take the job I've been offered in another city? Should I become a priest? His parishioners will often fret, I just don't know what God wants me to do, and look at Bransfield expectantly, hoping he can act as a spokesperson. There's a myth that there's only one thing that God wants you to do, he said. We spend so much time trying to figure out that one thing, and become so fearful of making a mistake. Bransfield challenges them to broaden their perspective. Actually, there are 18 things that God would be very happy if you chose. You're not cornered into becoming a priest or not. You're not cornered into marrying this woman or not. There are 6 billion people in the world. You're telling me that God looked at you and said, there's only one thing you can do in your life, I know it and you have to guess it or else? Could it be that you are putting your constraints on God? Bransfield's parishioners would often react with surprise to this message. Really? They're relieved to hear that they're not cornered. They've just been wearing blinders. Why is it so hard for all of us to see the bigger picture? To understand what lulls us into adopting a narrow frame, we will dig into a seemingly easy decision, a customer choosing a stereo to buy, and reveal the complexity that lies underneath it. 4. In the early 1990s, Shane Frederick, then a graduate student, was shopping for a stereo in Vancouver, and he found himself frozen in indecision between a $1,000 Pioneer and a $700 Sony. He ended up spending almost an hour agonizing over the decision until finally a salesman approached him and asked a question. Well, think of it this way, would you rather have the Pioneer or the Sony and $300 worth of albums? That question broke Frederick's mental logjam. He decided to buy the Sony. The extra features of the Pioneer were cool, he figured, but not nearly as cool as a bunch of new music. That day in the electronics store landed Frederick a new stereo, but it would also, later in his career, spark a line of research. At the time he was stereo shopping, he was getting a master's in environmental studies, but later he switched to a PhD program in decision sciences. Recalling his stereo experience, the first experiment he conducted, as a doctoral student, explored the way consumers think about opportunity costs. Opportunity cost is a term from economics that refers to what we give up when we make a decision. For instance, if you and your spouse spend $40 on a Mexican dinner one Friday night, and then go to the movies $20, your opportunity cost might be a $60 sushi dinner plus some television at home. The sushi and TV combo is the next best thing you could have done with the same amount of time and money. Or if you love both shopping and hiking, then the opportunity cost of a Saturday afternoon at the mall might be the foregone opportunity to hike through a nearby park. Sometimes you'll be offered an option with a very high opportunity cost. For instance, if we invited you to our neighborhood sing-along on the same night as the Super Bowl. Assuming you are sane, you will turn down our invitation, because its opportunity cost is too high. The stereo salesman's question was a classic prod to think about opportunity cost. For Frederick to buy the $1,000 Pioneer stereo meant that he was sacrificing the chance to buy a $700 Sony stereo plus $300 worth of music. It intrigued Frederick that it simply hadn't occurred to him to think that way. Some economists take it for granted that consumers make these opportunity cost calculations. One journal article summarized the typical reception. Decision-makers confronted with a showcase of beluga caviar consider how much hamburger they could buy with the same money. People intuitively take opportunity cost into account. But Frederick knew that, before the salesperson intervened, he hadn't done that analysis. Suspecting that other consumers were likely to fall into the same trap, he and his colleagues designed a study to test whether consumers spontaneously considered opportunity costs. One of the questions in their study was this: imagine that you have been saving some extra money on the side to make some purchases, and on your most recent visit to the video store you come across a special sale on a new video. This video is one with your favorite actor or actress, and your favorite type of movie such as a comedy, drama, thriller, etc. This particular video that you are considering is one you have been thinking about buying for a long time. It is available for a special sale price of $14.99. What would you do in this situation? Please circle one of the options below. A. Buy this entertaining video. B. Not buy this entertaining video. Given this choice, 75% bought the video and only 25% passed. Probably you'd have made the same decision after all. It's your favorite actor Leonardo DiCaprio. In your favorite type of film, sinking ship movies. And you've been considering it for a while. Later the researchers asked a different group of people the same question, but with a minor modification printed here in bold. A. Buy this entertaining video. B. Not buy this entertaining video. Keep the $14.99 for other purchases. Surely the part in bold should not have to be stated. It's obvious and even a little insulting. Do we really need to remind people that they can use their money to buy things other than videos? Nonetheless, when shown that simple, stupid reminder, 45% of the people decided not to buy the video. The reminder almost doubled the chance that people would pass on the purchase. Which makes us wonder whether Quaker would have benefited from a slight tweak to its choices. A. Buy Snapple. B. Don't buy Snapple. Keep the $1.8 billion for other purchases. This study presents very good news for all of us. It suggests that being exposed to even a weekend of another alternative you could buy something else with this money, if you want, is sufficient to improve our purchasing decisions. We can understand if you're a little suspicious that our decisions can be improved so easily. It's rarely so simple to repair one of our cognitive biases. It's like learning that you can cure the avian flu by clapping your hands. But here's the catch: you won't clap your hands if you don't realize you have the avian flu. Or to escape that metaphor, you won't think up additional alternatives if you aren't aware you're neglecting them. Often you simply won't recognize you're stuck in the narrow frame. Think about Frederick's predicament. What's in his spotlight? The two stereos. He stares at them, mentally comparing their aesthetics and features and prices. It's a hard comparison. How much is it worth to have a wider frequency range? Or a slightly cooler speaker design? As he dwells on what's inside the spotlight, his brain obligingly ignores what's outside, like the music he could buy if he picked the cheaper stereo. In a sense, he was the victim of his own ability to focus. Focusing is great for analyzing alternatives but terrible for spotting them. Think about the visual analogy: when we focus we sacrifice peripheral vision. And there's no natural corrective for this. Life won't interrupt our focus to draw our attention to all of our options. Frederick's stereo salesperson was surprisingly good-hearted to break his focus and prompt him to think about opportunity cost. A more mercenary salesperson, who wanted to maximize her commission, would never have gone there. She'd have kept Frederick's spotlight trained on the expensive stereo. You know, Shane, it's ultimately a matter of quality. Do you think it's worth paying a little more to hear your favorite bands more clearly? You will never encounter a car salesman who says, "Hey, why not buy the entry-level model and use the savings to take your family on vacation?" Our lack of attention to opportunity costs is so common, in fact, that it can be shocking when someone acknowledges them. Frederick and his co-authors highlight a speech from Republican President and former General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953, a few months after he took office in his first term. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants each serving a town of 60,000. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000. How much better would our decisions be if more people shared Eisenhower's willingness to consider opportunity costs? What if we started every decision by asking some simple questions? What are we giving up by making this choice? What else could we do with the same time and money? 5. Another technique you can use to break out of a narrow frame is to run the vanishing options test. The conceit here is that Aladdin's genie has an eccentric older brother who, instead of granting 3 wishes to a person, arbitrarily takes options away. Below, we give you a generic form of the vanishing options test, which you can adapt to your situation. You cannot choose any of the current options you're considering. What else could you do? To see how the vanishing options test can help you evade a narrow frame, consider a conversation we had with Margaret Sanders, the Director of Career Services for a graduate school of government. Names in this case study are disguised to prevent embarrassment. Sanders was struggling with a tough decision: should she tolerate a marginally performing employee or, as she put it, begin the ridiculously long and tedious process for documentation of poor performance that can eventually lead to termination? The employee in question was her administrative assistant, Anna, who had 2 primary responsibilities. First, she handled administrative tasks, such as tracking expenses and managing the group's database, and second, she served as the front door, the face of the office, the first point of contact for students seeking jobs or for recruiters seeking students. While Anna was good with the first set of tasks, she struggled with the social aspect of her job. She was much more introverted than Sanders had realized during their interview. "I think it hurts for her to talk to people," said Sanders. Unfortunately, the social side of the job was critical, and Anna's shyness made the center less effective. But firing Anna was not an easy answer. The university had strict protocols for handling terminations. It would be many months, Sanders knew, before Anna would be gone, if she was gone at all, and in the meantime, it would be incredibly awkward to work with her in an internet office of 5 people. Dan Heath had the chance to speak with Sanders, as she was agonizing about whether or not to fire Anna. And to interrupt the story for a moment, we hope your narrow frame alarm bells went off as you read that phrase, whether or not to fire Anna. That phrase, whether or not, is, as we've seen, a classic warning signal that you haven't explored all your options. So, in keeping with that idea, Dan tried pushing Sanders with the vanishing options test. "Dan, imagine that I told you you're stuck with Anna indefinitely, and you can rely on her to be the front door. She cannot be the face of the office anymore. What would you do?" Sanders: "We could move her out of the front door, and try to staff the front door differently. Maybe the professional staff could take an hour each, and we could get some work-study students in to fill in the rest of the time." Dan: "Is that a viable option? Could you afford to hire work-study students?" Sanders: "They are super cheap. We only pay about 25% of their hourly rate, which comes out to about $2.50 per hour." Notice how easy it was for Sanders to break out of her narrow frame with a bit of prodding. It took less than a minute for her to generate another reasonable option, to hire work-study students to serve as the front door, with Anna shifting to full-time administrative duties. It was an option that would fix the problem and cost only $20 per day. Not to mention the benefit from the extra time Anna could spend on database or accounting work. The breakthrough that Margaret Sanders experienced is not unusual. When people imagine that they cannot have an option, they are forced to move their mental spotlight elsewhere, really move it often for the first time in a long while. In contrast, when people are asked to generate another option, they often half-heartedly shift the spotlight a couple of inches, suggesting a minor variant of an existing alternative. The old saying, "necessity is the mother of invention," seems to apply here. Until we are forced to dig up a new option, we're likely to stay fixated on the ones we already have. So our eccentric genie, who seems at first glance to be cool he's taking away our options, may actually be kind-hearted. Removing options can in fact do people a favor, because it makes them notice that they're stuck on one small patch of a wide landscape. Of course, we should be clear that people respond much more cheerfully when you metaphorically, rather than literally, remove their options. In the call with Margaret Sanders, Dan was trying to act as a decision advisor, just as Heidi Price acted as a decision advisor for high school seniors and Father Bransfield did for parishioners. This is the same role that we're urging you to play with your colleagues and loved ones. When you hear the telltale signs of a narrow frame, people wondering whether or not they should make a certain decision, or rehashing arguments endlessly about the same limited set of choices, push them to widen their options. Prod them for their opportunity cost. What else could they do with the same time and money? Or try the vanishing options test. Ask them what they'd do if their current alternatives disappeared. Being stuck in the narrow frame is hard to recognize, but only when you're the one inside it. From the outside, as an advisor, you will be able to see clearly when your coworkers or your children are unduly limiting their choices. A wider view can sometimes make a big difference. Chapter 2 in one page. Avoid a narrow frame. 1. Teenagers get trapped in a narrow frame. They are blind to their choices. Should I go to the party or not? 2. Unfortunately, most organizations tend to make decisions like teenagers. Quaker lost $1.5 billion in 3 years on the Snapple acquisition. Not research, only 29% of organizations considered more than one alternative versus 30% of teens. 3. Often our options are far more plentiful than we think. College selection counselor Price helps students explore their full range of options. 4. Why do we get stuck in a narrow frame? Focusing on our current options means that other things are out of our spotlight. Frederick got stuck choosing between two stereos. He failed to consider his other options. 5. How do we escape a narrow frame? Think about opportunity cost. Keep the $14.99 for other purchases. Eisenhower, one bomber, a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. 6. Or try the vanishing options test. What if your current options disappeared? Margaret Sanders realized she had a better option than firing Anna, the introverted receptionist. When our options disappear, we're forced to move our spotlights. 7. It's easier to spot a narrow frame from the outside. Watch for it as a decision advisor. Whether or not decisions should set off warning bells. Note that we have corrected the punctuation and capitalization in these entries, though not the grammar. This diminishes authenticity but greatly enhances one's sanity in reading it. Note that we are counting a whether or not decision as one alternative. It's one alternative that will be either accepted or rejected. Note that we are claiming it is a bad idea to buy the video. Buying it is probably the right decision for some people and the wrong one for others, depending on their bank account and their movie lust. But the one thing we can say for sure is that it would be a bad decision to buy it without first considering what else the money could have bought. Chapter 3. 3 Multi-Track 1. In Sausalito, California, there is a small firm called Lexicon that has coined the names for $15 billion brands, including BlackBerry, Dasani, Breeze, OnStar, Pentium, Scion, and Swiffer. These names don't emerge from brainstorming sessions that yield sudden lightning bolt insights. Nobody gets struck by lightning 15 times. Rather, Lexicon's magic is its creative process, which helps the team avoid getting stuck in the narrow frame. Consider the firm's 2006 work for Colgate, which was preparing to launch a disposable mini toothbrush. The center of the brush held a dab of special toothpaste, which was designed to make rinsing unnecessary. So you could carry the toothbrush with you, use it in a cab or an airplane lavatory, and then toss it out. When Lexicon founder and CEO David Plotchak first saw the toothbrush, he said, what stood out was its small size. So, if you were on the Lexicon team, with your mental spotlight pointed at the tiny toothbrush, you'd be tempted to start tossing out names that highlight its small size, petite brush, mini brush, brushlet, etc. Notice that, in brainstorming that way, you would have already locked yourself into a tight frame with two assumptions. 1. The name should connote smallness, and 2. Brush should be part of the name. That early lock-in is something that the Lexicon team has learned to fight. Clients will often come to them with a narrow conception of what a good name is. Some at Intel, for instance, had wanted to call the Pentium Pro chip. Some at P&G had wanted to call the Swiffer EZM op. Lexicon has learned that the best names emerge from what we'll call multi-tracking, considering several options simultaneously. To get familiar with the new toothbrush, Plotchak's team at Lexicon began to use it in their daily lives, and what struck them was how odd it was, at first, not to spit out the toothpaste that it produced. We always spit out the toothpaste. Fortunately, unlike normal brushes, the new brush didn't create a big mass of minty lather. The mouthfeel was lighter and more pleasant, more like a breath strip. It was this lack of foaminess that was the brush's most distinctive trait. So it dawned on the team that the name of the brush should not signal smallness, it should signal lightness, cleanliness, softness. Armed with that insight, Plotchak began to multi-track. He asked his network of linguists, 70 of them in 50 countries, to brainstorm about metaphors, sounds, and word parts that connoted lightness. By working independently, they vastly increased the pool of considered names. Meanwhile, he asked another 2 colleagues within Lexicon to help. But he kept these 2 in the dark about the client and the product. Instead, he gave this team, referred to as the excursion team, a fictional mission. He told them that the cosmetics brand Olay was interested in introducing a new line of oral care products, and their job would be to help Olay brainstorm about product ideas. Plotchak chose Olay because he believed that beauty was an implicit selling point for the new brush. Good oral care means white teeth, and white teeth are better looking, Plotchak said. After a period of exploration, the excursion team pitched some intriguing product ideas, including the Olay Sparkling Rinse, a mouthwash that would make your teeth gleam. In the end, it was the insight about lightness, rather than beauty, that prevailed. The team of linguists produced a long list of possible words and phrases, and one word on the list jumped out at Plotchak's team: wisp. It was the perfect association for the new brushing experience. It's not something heavy and foamy, it's barely there. It's a wisp. Thus was born the Colgate Wisp. Notice what's missing from the Lexicon process, the part when everyone sits around a conference table, staring at the toothbrush and brainstorming names together. Hey, how about toothbrush? The URL is available. Lexicon refuses to single-track the process. In fact, in most of its naming projects, Lexicon forms 3 teams of 2, with each group pursuing a different angle. Usually there is an excursion team, blind to the client and the product, that spends its time chasing analogies from related domains. In naming Levi's curved jeans, which were engineered differently for different body types, the excursion team dug into references on surveying and architecture. Lexicon's multi-tracking often leads to wasted work. In the Wisp case, the excursion team found themselves at a dead end with the Olay assignment. But it's precisely this willingness to work in parallel, and to endure inefficiency, that often leads to a break in the case. That's what happened with one of Lexicon's most famous projects, the BlackBerry, made by Research in Motion RIM. When RIM engaged Lexicon, Plowcheck and his team knew that they were fighting negative associations with PDAs. They buzz, they vibrate, they irritate us and stress us out. He challenged the excursion team, again unfamiliar with the actual client, to catalog things in the world that bring us joy, that slow us down, that relax us. Their goal was to discover names that might offset the negative PDA associations. The list grew quickly: camping, riding a bicycle, having a martini on Friday night, taking a bubble bath, fly fishing, cooking, having a martini on Thursday night, and on and on. Later someone added picking strawberries to the list. Someone else plucked out the word strawberry. But one of Lexicon's linguists said, "No, strawberry sounds slow. Think of the similar vowels in drawl, dawdle, and stall." Soon it was crossed out and replaced with the word blackberry underneath. Someone else noticed that the keys on the PDA look like the seeds on a blackberry. Epiphany. Actually, no. The RIM clients were not positive at first, because of the frame they'd started with. They'd been leaning toward more descriptive names such as Easy Nail. Plowcheck said, "Most clients feel that they're going to know the perfect name as soon as they see it, but it doesn't happen that way." Eventually, the case for the name BlackBerry prevailed, and the rest is history. The client's initial reluctance is instructive, though. Sometimes we'll know the right option when we see it, and sometimes we won't. But in this chapter we'll see that the simple act of surfacing another option, even if we ultimately decide against it, helps us to make better choices. We've already encountered the dangers of narrow framing and the value of expanding our options, but we're about to see something new: the unexpected power of considering our options simultaneously. A study of graphic designers demonstrates the value of multi-tracking. The designers, tasked with making a banner ad for a web magazine, were randomly assigned to use one of two creative processes. Half of them were instructed to design one ad at a time, receiving feedback after each new design. Each designer started with a single ad, and revised it 5 times based on rounds of feedback, yielding a total of 6 ads. The other half of the designers were instructed to use a simultaneous process, so that each one started with 3 ads and received feedback on all 3. Then, in successive rounds, the set was whittled down with further feedback to 2 ads and then 1 final ad. All of the designers ultimately created the same number of ads, 6, and received the same quantity of feedback, 5 ad critiques. The only difference was the process, simultaneous versus one at a time. As it turned out, process mattered a great deal. The simultaneous designers' ads were judged superior by the magazine's editors and by independent ad execs, and they earned higher click-through rates on a real-world test of the banners on the website. Why? The study's authors, trying to explain the better performance of the simultaneous designers, said, since simultaneous participants received feedback on multiple ideas simultaneously, they were more likely to read and analyze critique statements side by side. Direct comparison perhaps helped them better understand key design principles, and led to more principled choices for subsequent prototypes. In other words, the simultaneous designers, by multi-tracking, were learning something useful about the shape of the problem. They were able to triangulate among the features of their 3 initial ads, combining their good elements and omitting the bad. You may recall this is the same logic used by Steve Cole, the Think and Not Where guy from the first chapter, in explaining why it's helpful to hire multiple vendors for the same project. He said, you get convergence on some issues, so you know they are right, and you also learn to appreciate what makes people different and special. None of this can you do if you're just talking to one person. Multi-tracking has another advantage too, one that is more unexpected. It feels better. After the banner ad study concluded, both sets of designers were interviewed. Asked to rate the usefulness of the feedback they received during the design process, over 80% of the simultaneous designers said the feedback was helpful. Only 35% of the one-at-a-time designers agreed, and in fact, over half of them believed the feedback they'd received was critical of them. None of the simultaneous designers felt criticized. The simultaneous designers also reported that, as a result of the experience, they felt more confident in their design abilities. The one-at-a-time designers didn't agree. Why was the experiment so frustrating for the one-at-a-time designers? The study's authors speculated that people who work on a single track begin to take their work too personally, viewing criticism as a rebuke of their only option. Or as one of the authors, Scott Clemmer, said, if I have only one design, then my ego is perfectly conflated with my design. But if I have multiple designs, I can separate the two. This is a critical point. Multi-tracking keeps egos in check. If your boss has 3 pet projects in play, chances are she'll be open to unvarnished feedback about them, but if there's only one pet project, it will be harder for her to hear the truth. Her ego will be perfectly conflated with the project. So, given the clear benefits of multi-tracking, what explains the failure of most organizations to embrace it? Many executives are worried that exploring multiple options will take too long. It's a reasonable fear, but the researcher Kathleen Eisenhart has found that the opposite is true. In a study of top leadership teams in Silicon Valley, an environment that tends to place a premium on speed, she found that executives who weigh more options actually make faster decisions. It's a counterintuitive finding, but Eisenhart offers 3 explanations. First, comparing alternatives helps executives to understand the landscape, what's possible and what's not, what variables are involved. That understanding provides the confidence needed to make a quick decision. Second, considering multiple alternatives seems to undercut politics. With more options, people get less invested in any one of them, freeing them up to change positions as they learn. As with the banner ad study, multi-tracking seems to help keep egos under control. Third, when leaders weigh multiple options, they've given themselves a built-in fallback plan. As an example, one company studied by Eisenhart was pursuing negotiations with several partners simultaneously. When the negotiations with the first-choice partner failed, the president simply cut a deal with the second-choice partner. If, instead, the firm had pursued only one option initially, those negotiations might well have dragged on as the president fought to salvage the deal. And he would have been tempted to concede too much to make it work. With some decisions, finding more options is easy. You can just expand your search. You can interview 3 job candidates rather than 1, or if you're shopping for a house, you can visit 10 rather than 5. After all, you can't move into the dream home you never saw. There's no right number of houses to see or job candidates to interview. One rule of thumb is to keep searching for options until you fall in love at least twice. If you've only identified one good candidate for a job, for instance, you'll have the strong urge to talk yourself into hiring her, which is a recipe for the confirmation bias. You'll start to make excuses for the flaws you see. She asked us not to call her old boss for a reference, but that's probably okay, because the boss sounded like a real jerk. The same search expanding logic also applies to choosing a car or a college or a job, though there are certainly common sense limits, i.e., you probably don't need to fall in love with 2 hairdryers before picking one, and God help you, if you apply this advice to marriage. So far in this chapter, we've emphasized the benefits of multi-tracking your options. We've implied that more is better. However, if you've ever walked into an ice cream store and found yourself stymied by the array of choices, you know there may be a limit to the amount of more we can take. This leads us to an important concern about multi-tracking. Psychologists such as Barry Schwartz have written about the dangers of choice overload, our tendency to freeze in the face of too many options. Is multi-tracking likely to plunge people into choice overload? There's research suggesting that extreme multi-tracking is detrimental. A classic study by Columbia's Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper monitored the behavior of consumers in a grocery store. One day, the store set up a sampling table with 6 different kinds of jam, and customers loved it. Another day, the store set up a table with 24 different kinds of jam, and it was even more popular than the first. The surprise came at the cash register. Customers who'd chosen among 6 jams were 10 times more likely to actually buy a jar of jam than customers who'd chosen among 24. It was fun to sample 24 flavors, it seems, but painful to pick among them. The choice was paralyzing. Most decisions, though, don't involve choice sets that force us to choose among 24 options. Remember what we saw in the last chapter: when most people and organizations make decisions, they are more likely to be choosing among, one kind of jam. I'm deciding whether or not to buy this strawberry jam. We want to suggest that adding even 1 jar of jam to the table, that is, adding 1 more alternative to your decision, will substantially improve your decisions, and it stops well short of triggering decision paralysis. Note for motivated readers, the endnotes contain a wonkish discussion that has more detail about why we don't think multi-tracking is likely to produce decision paralysis. For evidence that adding another alternative can lead to superior decisions, consider a study of every major decision made at a medium-sized private German technology firm. The researchers, professors at the University of Kiel in Germany, had discovered that the firm kept extremely detailed notes of its meetings, including deliberations on decisions. The notes were sent to the firm's major investor, to keep him abreast of what was happening. Over one particular 18-month period, the archives revealed that the executive board had debated and resolved 83 major decisions. Decisions never involved more than 3 alternatives, and 95% were either a whether or not decision, 40%, or a 2-alternative choice, 55%. Thus these decision-makers were noticeably savvier about escaping narrow framing than the typical firm in that study on this page. The university researchers discovered the archive many years after the decisions had been made, so it was possible, with the help of the executive board, to assess the quality of the decisions in light of their subsequent success or failure. In an intense rating procedure that involved hours of discussion and debate, the board categorized each of its 83 decisions as having proved to be very good, satisfactory, or poor. When the researchers analyzed the data, the evidence was striking. When the executive board considered more than 1 alternative, they made 6 times as many very good decisions. Specifically, 40% of the multi-option decisions were rated very good, compared with only 6% of the whether or not decisions. That is not a small effect. That's why we believe decision paralysis is not a big factor in most circumstances. You don't need a plethora of choices to improve your decisions. You just need 1 extra choice, or 2. Forget 24 different kinds of jam, we'll happily settle for 2 or 3. 2. Not all choices are created equal. If the simultaneous designers in the banner ad study had created ads that differed only in the size of the front, do you like the 11-point or the 12-point version better? That's not really multi-tracking. It's more like multi-tweaking. To get the benefits of multi-tracking, we need to produce options that are meaningfully distinct. We must be careful, too, to avoid sham options, which exist only to make the real option look better. More than a few real estate agents, for instance, have admitted to taking their clients to lousy properties first, to make the subsequent visits more appealing. This sham option technique is used frequently in politics, where bosses demand choices, but aren't always careful to assess the quality of the options. For insight on this subject, we turn to a formidable practitioner of the art of manipulation, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. In his memoir White House Years, he discusses a classic bureaucratic trick that was played on President Richard Nixon, who was considering what policy to adopt on a particular issue in Europe. The State Department presented a memo to Nixon with 3 options. Kissinger noted that 2 options were obvious losers, leaving only 1 plausible choice. Here was the standard bureaucratic device of leaving the decision-maker with only 1 real option, which for easy identification is placed in the middle. The classic case, I joked, would be to confront the policymaker with the choices of nuclear war, present policy, or surrender. Nixon may have thought he had options, but they were illusory. He was stuck in a narrow frame the whole time. If the president can fall for it, so can you. Managers need to push for legitimate alternatives, not sham options. To diagnose whether your colleagues have created real or sham options, poll them for their preferences. If there's disagreement, that's a great sign that you have real options. An easy consensus may be a red flag. Granted, it can sometimes be difficult to produce distinct options. The spotlight effect is partly to blame. If we're thinking about installing wood floors in our house, for example, it will be natural to consider different types of wood flooring. If we're really thinking out of the box, we might consider doing another home improvement project instead. But truly distinct options use more rugs. Stain the existing floor and go to Hawaii on a savings. Forget the floors and buy a car are less likely to emerge, because they require greater swings of the spotlight. Generating distinct options is even more difficult when our minds settle into certain well-worn grooves. Two of those grooves are common states of mind, studied widely by researchers, that play a role in almost every decision we make. One is triggered when we think about avoiding bad things, and one is triggered when we think about pursuing good things. When we're in one state, we tend to ignore the other. To illustrate one of these states of mind, imagine a morning that goes as follows. Your teenage son talks to you about his duties as the president of a service-minded student club. You're proud of him, but you also hope he understands the commitments he's made. In your driveway, you bump into your next-door neighbor, who mentions that a home down the street recently sold, after 6 months, for far less than its asking price. On the way to work, you listen to a radio program about the potential dangers of a newly emerging technology. Then, an hour after you arrive at the office, your boss pulls you aside and tells you about a new position that has opened up. It involves leading a small team and creating and launching a new product. It's a pretty risky product concept, but your boss thinks there's solid potential. He wonders if you'd be interested. It would involve a lateral move, with fewer direct reports than you currently have but potentially more glory if everything goes well. What's your gut reaction to the offer? You might feel a little cautious. It doesn't really sound like a promotion, and you have a responsibility to get your team through its current project. And what happens if the new product is a flop? Will you have sabotaged your career prospects? You will definitely want to consider the position carefully. Better safe than sorry. Now imagine a different morning. Your son tells you about his aspirations for a club he joined at school. You feel parental pride that he's pursuing big goals. Your neighbor tells you about how much he loves his herb garden, which gets you thinking about some landscaping ideas for your own backyard. On the way to work, you listen to a radio program about the opportunities opened up by newly emerging technology. An hour after you arrive at work, the same as before, your boss tells you about a new position. Now what's your gut reaction to the position? This time, you might feel a bit more open and enthusiastic. You're being trusted to lead a new product with great potential. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. How you react to the position, in short, depends a great deal on your mindset at the time it's offered. Psychologists have identified two contrasting mindsets that affect our motivation and our receptiveness to new opportunities: a prevention focus, which orients us toward avoiding negative outcomes, and a promotion focus, which orients us toward pursuing positive outcomes. In the first scenario above, you arrive at work with a prevention focus, which means that you are in a vigilant mood. You want to ensure that your son lives up to his duties. You're worried about your home losing its value. You really hope policymakers will stave off the dangers of the new technology. So, when you think about the new position, your spotlight tends to highlight what could go wrong, what you could lose. Whereas in the second scenario you have a promotion focus, meaning that you are eager rather than vigilant. You're open to new ideas and new experiences. Both are useful, and we shift between them as we consider different decisions in our lives. They don't coexist easily, though. It's hard to embrace both at once. Yet the wisest decisions may combine the caution of the prevention mindset with the enthusiasm of the promotion mindset. Consider a study of the way 4,700 public companies navigated three global recessions: 1980 to 1982, 1990 to 1991, and 2000 to 2002. Three Harvard researchers, Ranjay Gulati, Nitin Noria, and Franzwil Gizajan, pored over the company's financial statements, analyzing the way they'd responded to the tough market conditions. The top-level findings were sobering. 17% of the companies didn't survive the relevant recession, and another 40% of them, 3 years after the recession ended, hadn't returned to their pre-recession levels of sales and profits. The researchers sorted the companies into categories based on how they reacted to the recession, and two of the categories were inspired by the promotion and prevention mindsets. Prevention-focused companies made primarily defensive moves. They tightened their belts and tried to reduce risks. Promotion-focused companies went on the offensive, continuing to make strategic bets and investments. Both categories of companies tended to suffer because of their disproportionate focus on one set of tools. The researchers report that prevention-focused companies, with their focus on cost-cutting, tended to adopt a siege mentality. Inside these companies, they write, pessimism permeates the organization. Centralization, strict controls, and the constant threat of more cuts build a feeling of disempowerment. The focus becomes survival, both personal and organizational. The promotion-focused companies, on the other hand, tended to be naive and slow to react. The researchers said these companies developed a culture of optimism that leads them to deny the gravity of a crisis for a long time. The most successful companies acted more like multi-trackers, combining the best elements of promotion and prevention. During the 2000 recession, for instance, Staples closed some underperforming stores and contained its operating costs, but it also hired 10% more workers, using them to roll out some new high-end services. Meanwhile, Staples' arch-rival, Office Depot, took a prevention-focused approach, cutting 6% of its workforce and failing to make comparable investments in new businesses. The difference in approach showed up on the company's bottom lines. In the 3 years after the recession, Staples was about 30% more profitable than Office Depot. The best multi-trackers, such as Staples, cut costs by becoming more efficient rather than by laying off employees, and they kept investing in R&D and new business opportunities. They were cautious and eager at once, and their ambidextrousness boosted their chance of thriving. The researchers measured success by looking for companies that rebounded strongly after the recession, beating their rivals by 10% or more on both sales growth and profit growth. Multi-trackers were 42% more likely to be strong rebounders than companies that were solely promotion-focused, and they were 76% more likely to be strong rebounders than companies that were solely prevention-focused. Thinking and not what turns out to be good corporate strategy. Blending the two mindsets, in short, is a recipe for a wiser decision. That's why we've got to be alert for any situation where one mindset prevails. In a budget-cutting environment, the prevention mindset will dominate. How can we do the minimum amount of harm given that we have to make these cuts? How can we protect ourselves from calamity? As a decision advisor in this situation, you can help your colleagues by nudging them toward the promotion focus. We all know we need to cut 5%. But what if, instead, we could cut 8% so that we could free up some money to invest in our most exciting opportunities? What's our best chance to make a great leap forward? In contrast, consider an aspiring screenwriter who has just moved to law, imagining infinite opportunity, exciting new stories, fascinating new friends, lucrative new deals, and great industry parties. A compassionate friend might invoke the prevention mindset. What can you do to make sure you don't get pinched economically while you're waiting for some of these wonderful opportunities to pan out? This blending of mindsets is as vital for our personal decisions as it is for organizational decisions, but we don't always manage to do it on our own. Consider the case of Doreen and Frank, as recounted in a book by University of Michigan psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema. Doreen, a caseworker for the Los Angeles County Welfare Department, was deeply committed to her work. But it wasn't easy for her emotionally. She felt angry about her apathetic clients, who didn't seem motivated to help themselves, and it broke her heart when needy clients were kicked off the welfare rolls. The emotional roller coaster left Doreen increasingly stressed out, and the stress was interfering with her family relationships. Nolan-Hoeksema wrote, on several evenings, Doreen has either exploded at one of her kids for something minor, like not turning off the television when she called him for dinner, or has secluded herself in the den all evening, trying not to blow up at the million things she found annoying around the house. At the end of her rope, Doreen visited a mentor at her church, who encouraged her to be proactive about managing her stress. Later she wrote out a list of possible solutions. 1. Quit my job. 2. Go to halftime. 3. Get my kids to be less irritating. 4. Ask Frank to control the kids more. 5. Find a less stressful job. 6. Find some way to release the stress before I get home. Notice that Doreen did a great job of generating multiple options. It will always be tempting, in situations like hers, to slip into a narrow frame, reducing the situation to a single choice, such as whether or not to quit or whether or not to put muzzles on your children. Unfortunately, though, many of her options were infeasible. Because her family needed the income she earned, the first two choices were out. Nor were options 3 and 4 possible. Her children were unlikely to transform suddenly into mute, compliant beings, and shifting more of the parental burden onto Frank, who was already pulling his weight, did not feel right. The fundamental problem, she realized, was not with her kids or her husband, but with her overheated response to life's normal irritations. That led her to focus on option 5, finding a less stressful job. Finding a job that was less emotionally taxing would provide instant stress relief. However, it also felt like a betrayal of one of her core religious beliefs, the imperative to serve the less fortunate. Feeling stuck, she talked with her husband, Frank, about the last option, releasing stress before coming home. He threw out a few ideas. Why not listen to soothing music on the way home? Doreen typically tuned into a news show. Hearing about the world's various problems and corruptions tended to further inflame her mood. Frank also suggested that she leave work early and work out at the YMCA before heading home. These are simple ideas, and many of us might have come up with similar ones. What we want to highlight is the everyday wisdom in Doreen's instinct to talk over her options with Frank and her church mentor, as well as in Frank's subtle shift in focus. While Doreen was dwelling on ways to prevent or minimize stress, quitting her job, cutting back parental responsibilities, Frank pushed her to think about ways she could increase her happiness by working out or listening to good music. He added the promotion mindset to her prevention mindset. Encouraging our loved ones and colleagues to blend the two mindsets can help them escape from an emotional cul-de-sac. When life offers the United States of this or that choice, we should have the gall to ask whether the right answer might be both. In the last chapter, we saw the value of evading a narrow frame by seeking out more options. This chapter added a new wrinkle. It's worth cultivating multiple options at the same time. As we saw at the German technology firm, decisions with a couple of alternatives turn out dramatically better than decisions with one. In our experience, some managers will try to excuse single tracking by arguing, even though we're only considering one option right now, it's not really a whether or not decision, because we've considered many other options over the last few years. Unfortunately, as we saw with the banner ad study, exploring ideas sequentially even though it yields multiple options over time is not as powerful as exploring them simultaneously. Multi-tracking improves our understanding of the situations we're facing. It lets us cobble together the best features of our options. It helps us keep our egos in check. Developing multiple alternatives will sometimes be difficult because our minds don't always think this and that. Often, for example, we'll get stuck in a mindset of prevention or promotion. If we can do both, seeking out options that minimize harm and maximize opportunity, we are more likely to uncover our full spectrum of choices. There's an issue we have dodged so far, though. In this chapter, options have been plentiful. Lexicon considered dozens of names, the banner ad designers created 6 ads, and Doreen produced 6 possible solutions, not counting suggestions from Frank. But what if you're in a situation where it's not so easy to generate new options? What if you're stuck at a seeming dead end? That's the issue we'll explore next. Where can you go looking for new alternatives? Chapter 4. Find someone who solved your problem. 1. The massive scale of Walmart. Its $444 billion revenue in 2012 amounts to $64 for every person on